Hi, I'm here with Charlie Arehart. This is Michaela Light from TerraTech, and we're going to be talking about ColdFusion 2020, which is coming out real soon. Yeah, I've got the CF hat on there, Charlie. And I just did a interview with Ashish Garg, who's the director of software development at ColdFusion at Adobe. And Charlie just wrote a amazing article all about, based on that podcast and all the cool new features. So I guess the question is, what's the feature you're most excited about that you've now learned is coming out in ColdFusion 2020?
Well, thanks for that. You're very kind. I don't know if it was amazing. The interview was amazing, and I want to again praise you both as I did in the blog post. But yeah, I wanted to pull out in that blog post of mine just a couple of key points, because in particular, I was thrilled to hear his discussion of things related to aspects of deploying CF, Docker-based deployment, orchestration-based deployment, or just even regular old installations. There were some issues with that people who are trying to do more modernized, more scalable deployment were running into. So he specifically addressed those, and I just wanted to be able to point those out in my blog post, and you were kind enough to see that and say you'd like to have us have a quick little discussion about it. So sure, we can get right into that.
I think more CFers need to know what's coming in
Absolutely.
2020, because occasionally, less and less these days, but occasionally people get down on ColdFusion.
Yep.
I think that trend has actually decreased a lot since you've been waving the ColdFusion flag for many years.
Especially you, yeah.
And I've been doing the CF Alive podcast and book for a while, and I think it's starting to through osmosis, it's having an effect.
Sure.
But I was blown away by these new things coming in ColdFusion. I mean, they're basically re-engineering it to run well in the cloud.
Exactly. And not just in the cloud. And that was the point that I wanted to draw out was, what we want to talk about today is not all the cool new things that are coming that they even said, because he said more than we're going to talk about. And I didn't blog about them all either. You did. You guys had the blog post. You had the notes on the YouTube video. You've got the podcast notes. So anybody could go watch that, listen to it, or read all of that. But I just wanted to draw out these couple of key points that he made that were relevant to deployment. And so that's what we want to talk about today. So first, let me just go ahead and jump into them. He mentioned improved modularity of the engine, and that's huge because right now CF is a big monolith. Anybody that downloads it knows that it's several hundred meg. And it was a gig in 2018 when they included the API manager, but thankfully they took that out. But it's still really big. And if you get into the Docker images, and let me just say, we'll talk about this briefly later, but if you didn't know, there are Adobe provided ColdFusion Docker images for ColdFusion 2018, 2016, the PMT, the add-on services, the API manager. So you can do everything you want to do with CF in Docker, in Swarm, in Kubernetes, and whatever flavor of orchestration and deployment you want to do. But the point is, even those Docker images right now are really big. They're a few to several hundred meg, and that's just no good because when you pull them or run them for the first time, they're huge and they take a long time. And then even spinning up, they're slow. It takes about a minute to two before the instance is ready, the container that's implemented is ready. So the great news is that Ashish did say specifically that they're trying in 2020 to resize those, and his goal is for them to be as low as under 100 or 200 meg. And he talked about how they're going to have modules that can get pulled in even at deployment time, at runtime. That's all remains to be seen. That's going to be some interesting engineering work. And that's where we don't know what's going to come. But the good news is he said their goal is to make them smaller and for them to start up in just a few seconds. And that's awesome. That's what we've lacked. And of course, the Ortus images that are based on command box, that are based on WAR file deployment, and they even have them pre-warmed up. They've done things to make those go better, be smaller, be faster. But for anybody that wants, for some reason, to use the Adobe images, I'm just saying I'm glad to hear that they're seeking to make it smaller. And then this may also help even the Ortus command box-based images, because maybe they won't have to do it based on a WAR file. Maybe that WAR file, if that's the way they do it, could be much, much smaller. So this should help everybody that's interested in modern deployment, scalability for sure. And that leads to the next point, which he mentioned, which was improved licensing. Because whether you use
Yeah,
the
I mean,
Ortus
there's no
images,
point,
right?
no point putting ColdFusion on a serious diet, which it
Yep.
certainly needs doing for this issue. If you can't, have an orchestration thing where you have, it grows from 2 instances to 10 and then goes back
Yep.
down to 2 or whatever the numbers are.
Yeah, and let's say quickly for people that don't know, so, and again, this affects whether you use the Adobe images or Ortus's images. If you want to use those images for production, the Adobe licensing for that right now is that for standard, you got to buy another license for every instance you want to spin up, which is
even if it's only spun up for 3 minutes.
Right. Now, let's be clear, for development, no, it's free. So everybody hear that. Right now, you can do development, deployment of either the Adobe Docker images or the Ortus command box images. That's free for development. But if you want to use it for production, either of them, now you're subject to Adobe's licensing if you're going to use Adobe ColdFusion. And if you have only standard, you got to buy a license for every instance. And as you said, even if it's just for a matter of minutes. If you have enterprise, they at least have in CF 2018 said, and I have a blog post giving you the details, that you can have up to 8 instances. Now, what they don't clarify is that 8 instances anywhere or 8 instances on one machine. And I think it's only 8 instances on one machine, which again, for a lot of people is going to throw it out the window because they want to scale to multiple servers across, potentially disparate platforms, different networks, whatever. So regions, in AWS. So the bottom line is right now, the licensing is not well suited. And let me say too, for anybody that goes looking for this in the EULA, the end user licensing agreement, it's not in there. Instead, Adobe did a blog post last year. Sorry, it wasn't even that. They created a FAQ, frequently asked question page. They have one, and in it they threw in a couple of bullet points about licensing on Docker, which is kind of weird because that's not in the EULA you're agreeing to. But anyway, the EULA doesn't speak to it. This FAQ does, and it's quite limited. So the great news, and that's why we're here, is the great news is that, again, as she said, they understand that's got to change. In fact, let me just get the quote of what he said, because it really was a very compelling.
Said, when CF 2020 comes out, it will have to use the right licensing, which is suited for cloud environment.
Perfect.
Whatever else it will do will defeat the purpose.
Right. And then he went on to say that this licensing change was one of the key pillars that they felt would make CF20 successful, and it was a key requirement from the engineering side. So what we know is that he and others there understand that this can't continue the way it is. He's going to have to fight tooth and nail with various other people there. So that he admitted that that's going to take time and effort, but they are seeking to do that. So that's great news.
It's their legal and compliance department. The issue.
Well, and sales and other people, there's money, there's always money. Follow the money.
I didn't get the buy. I mean, yeah, might be some, but they probably, if they license per minute or even per hour, they'll make more money because people will be happy putting it in a cloud environment and their app will grow, and it will just. I mean, that's how Amazon makes their money, right? They only charge by the minute, but geez, they collect a bunch of dollars from charging by the minute.
Right. Sure, and we can all argue that, but there may be some, Neanderthal type person who's thinking, no, I want my, annual licensing. So that's, I don't mean to cast aspersions. I don't know anybody that's involved in that. I'm not saying I know anything, but sometimes
I got the vibe. It's lawyers being careful. Adobe is very cautious about, all that GDPR stuff that happened a year or two ago.
And that would be what he would say. I'm just saying there may be more to it than he could have even admitted.
Yeah.
But anyway, so those are the 2 or 3 key points: was the improved modularity, the reduced size, the improved speed of startup, and the improved licensing. And then there were a few other things that he threw out. And again, in my blog post, I highlight these, and then of course in the interview he gets into it in more detail, and I point in my blog post to where in the interview he gets into these. But there's going to be improvements regarding logging and monitoring and centralized deployment and improved forms of configuration, better suited to either command line or declarative configuration.
And language changes, they're going to make it.
Well, right, but I'm focused for now just on these things that are particularly related.
Deployment,
But they are going to have, serverless and Lambda function oriented support, increased integration with cloud-based services, NoSQL caching, messaging, and notification, and their hope for improved multi-cloud hybrid deployment. So again, those are the things that were relevant to deployment, then yes, talked about CF Script 2.0, gave some hints of some other new things to come in the language. And so that's, again, we want to be clear that we're not talking about this is all what's new in 2020, not at all. And it's not even all that he brought about in the hour that he spoke with you, but these are the key points that I thought for those focused on deployment. And also often, saying you'll never be reasonably considering using Adobe's ColdFusion images. First of all, I just want to say you absolutely can use them for development, and for many people, they work quite well. And then in the future, they will be better for production. And those improvements will also help the other command box or order-based images too. So good news for everybody, really, I think, is the way to look at it.
I think it's very good news for ColdFusion. I'll put the links down here in the comments so you can read Charlie's article and also see the original full-length interview with Ashish Garg from Adobe if you want to learn more. Or you can read we have put a transcript out. It's 26-page transcript. So
yes, it is.
Thanks, Charlie, for summarizing it. That was a big service you did for the community there. And also, I want to point out to folks that Ashish will be giving the keynote at a CF Summit in Las Vegas in about 6 weeks' time. And he told me he's going to be talking even more about what's coming in CF 2020 there. So if you haven't signed up for CF Summit, yet another good reason to go there and learn all about the cool stuff coming.
And they still have the low cost, they called it the early bird rate. I believe it's still there at $99. And then I'll just say, I'm going to also do a talk. One of the, multiple, like 30 or 40 sessions. One of them will be a talk I'll do for 50 minutes on getting started with Adobe's ColdFusion Docker images. Because again, you can use them right now. I mean, there's aspects of it that aren't clear to people. You don't hear a lot of talk about it. It is well documented. If you know where to look, I have blog posts pointing to that. And then I'm going to do a day-long pre-conference. So Pete's going to do one on security. Adobe's going to do one on the PMT. Adobe's going to do the ones on the certification. But I'm going to do one on going from 0 to 60 with the ColdFusion Docker images. So the point there is, if you don't really know anything about Docker yet, or if you do but you don't know anything about the Adobe images, I'm going to talk about getting started and going from not knowing really anything about Docker, and literally by middle of the day, within minutes, you'll have ColdFusion deployed. But I'll talk about the various ins and outs of some things related to them, and then in general about using Docker and Swarm and connecting things together. And then I'll talk towards the end about deployment on things like Kubernetes, whether on Azure or AWS, Google Cloud. I'll just point you to those directions, because this is the kind of stuff that once you learn about it, you realize there's a whole world of possibility. But it can also be so overwhelming as to lead some people to think, I'm not even going to bother. You don't want to look at it that way. There's a lot you can get out of using it just for your own use, for development, or I'll argue for working with different versions of things easily and testing something that works one way with one thing, try it with another. Right now, it's a pain in the butt for most people working with just Adobe's ColdFusion installers to run multiple instances, multiple versions. They don't know what to do. They're lost. And the command box images, based on the way command box works, it is easier with them, I'll grant. But for somebody that wants to just for some reason use the Adobe images, or doesn't use command box, maybe is using installation of ColdFusion installers, even in deployment production, even if it's just one instance, there's some challenges with that using the Docker images could help with. So once you learn about it, better understand it, you'll see the opportunities for where you can apply it. And that's my goal here, is just to get people more clearly aware of those possibilities. So looking forward to it. And I believe you'll be there as well.
I will be there, yes. Got a new book on ColdFusion coming out. So
that's right.
I'll be sharing that with folks.
Announcing that. Excellent.
Yeah, and it's great that you're doing that day-long class at CF Summit. And I just want to say, if anyone listening has never been to CF Summit, apart from the talks, it's a great opportunity to meet people in, quotes, the corridor track or hallway track. You can bump into Charlie or Ashish or any of the Adobe engineers, and if you've got a burning question, it's a great chance to get their attention and talk about it. So,
and it's been widely regarded by pretty much everybody that's ever talked about it as being just a really good conference in general. It's in Vegas every year. I never leave the hotel. Seriously, it might as well be in Peoria, Illinois for me. But anyway, so
I'll suggest that to them next year.
Sadly, I know there's some people that need to have that other reason for going, but I don't say sadly, but again, for me, it really doesn't matter. But my point is that it's a really well-run conference. People often state how much they appreciate it, well organized, lots of great content, lots of great folks, both Adobe and non-Adobe vendors, everything, parties, the meals are great. I mean, it's just really well done. And that's not to denigrate any others. In fact, you and I will both be at CF Camp, 2 weeks after that. And we may be talking again soon on the talk I'll be giving for that, but that's for another podcast, which I know you're going to be doing with other presenters at CF Camp. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, we'll be talking about CF Camp. I actually won't be at CF Camp. I have a conflicting event in Thailand at the same time this year. So, but my colleague Paul will be there. So
there you go. That's what it was.
So
good deal.
Anyway, thanks for coming on this little interview, and thanks for all you do for ColdFusion.
And for you, of course. Keep CF alive.